Okay, so I'm sure you guys all have favorite movies or TV shows that you guys, like to watch, or um, things that you've maybe even seen last week or a couple months ago. But can you guys say with confidence whether it was shot with digital or whether it was shot in film? Today, I want to highlight some of the key differences on digital and film. So we'll be going over the three key points that I think are pretty important. The first one would be film speed, or the sensitivity to light. The next is going to be cost of production. And then finally, we'll have storage, or how you prioritize your media. So the first thing we're covering is film speed, or the sensitivity of the light. Now, film speed is measured by the ISO system. In about 1970, it was finally standardized. Before, there was no standardization between digital and film, so companies would constantly get things mixed up, and films weren't as, correlated together. And so now film and digital both use the exact same systems of measurement. For film speed itself, an insensitive or low speed film, it doesn't mean that it's empathetic or can't feel anything. It means that it requires more exposure or light in order to produce an image. And vice versa, a high speed film requires less light to produce an image. This right here is a canister of film. ISO 100 is actually used for daylight photography, and the higher number that you go up, the more light, or the less light it's actually going to require. So ISO 400 is used in normal situations, ISO 800 is used in low light situations. Basically, the sensitivity of the film is determined by halide grains on the film itself. Halide grains are silver particles that are used to pick up light and process onto an image. There is a trade-off, however, with the more halide that's on a film, you tend to run into film grain. Now, film grain, you lose image quality, and as you'll see in a couple of slides, I will show you a really grainy film. So the more grain that you have on the film, the more sensitive it will become. And this is a film grain of different silver halide projections. This tends to be the least sensitive. As you can see, a lot more light areas. This is more sensitive, so you're going to lose a lot of image quality in this area here. With digital, it's a little different because we do not have silver halide to work with. We actually use sensors. And this is a sensor of a digital camera chip. So to increase the sensitivity on a sensor, you actually need to increase the power output of the sensor itself. So the trade-off between that, you don't get any film noise, but you tend to get film, you don't get film grain, you get film noise. Film noise is the actual electrons of the increase in power running through the camera. Here you can see a really, really grainy film. So there's a lot of image quality lost here. And then film noise, you see a lot of discoloration in the actual image. The next thing that I want to cover is cost of production. Now, we all know that movies cost a fortune to produce and to create, and that should be one of the key factors when coming up with whether or not you're going to use digital or film. So a standard roll of 16 millimeter film roll will run you about 11 minutes. And I checked the Kodak website to actually see the price of this. And typically it'll run you about $286 per roll. For a standard short film, around 90 minutes, you need about 45 rolls of film. So you can see how it can get pretty pricey. 35 millimeter film is what actual movies that we see on the big screen are shot on, which are more expensive. It'll run you about $800 per roll. And again, 45 rolls of that is only going to get you about an hour and a half movie. So you can see how the cost will constantly run out. So film prices tend to vary because film isn't used that much, so people can set different prices. With digital, you have a bit more stable market. So the cost of a digital camera is still expensive, make no mistake. But the prices tend to be a bit more stable. I checked with the Red Company, which is a high-end premier digital production company. Their camera base model, I built the package myself, and it ran me about $120,000. That was not including the lenses. With a Panavision film camera, it'll actually run you about $120,000. However, you need to buy the specific lenses for that, which will run you about $500,000. So this is a film camera. You can see the film stock goes in right there. And then this is a ARRI Alexa camera, which is all digital. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is storage and how you're going to store your media. So there's no easy way to store film, plain and simple. So it must be transferred into a computer by a lab technician, which is going to actually cost you even more money. It's a longer, daunting process. Aaron Eckhart quoted in an interview once that filmmaking is a difficult process. There are logistics of making film. You have to do your part and then change the entire thing around to do someone else's part. A lot of magic is lost between that, and you have to figure out how to get it back. This is especially true when you're looking at lab technicians and the things that they do. If one thing goes wrong with the film, the entire film stock is lost. If it's exposed to light for too long, the entire film is bad, and now you've just lost your film. This is an entire canister of dailies. So this is just one day's, this is one film's work. As you'll see in the next slide, with digital, it's a lot easier. It's just like your phone. You point the camera and shoot, and then you can transfer it over onto an SD card or something like that. So there's 7 ways that developers go through. So it's developing, bleaching, fixing, washing again, stabilizing, and drying. And this is the workings of a film developing machine. Lastly, I want to ask you guys a quick question. Can you guys tell me which one is film and which one is digital? Any takers? Which one?
Digital.
Left is digital, you think?
Yeah, it's not both.
Yeah, that is actually correct. So the left one is going to be digital. You tend to have a little bit more in focus in the background. Digital has a larger depth of field than film, but it's not the way that we're used to viewing movies. With pictures, we want to bring the subject to the forefront in order to focus on that. So the main character needs to be in focus. So everything in back is going to be blurred out. Also, the coloring is going to be a little bit higher with digital, although that's not necessarily a bad thing if you want to add a special effect for film. As you can see with the reds, the range of colors is a little bit different. But that concludes my presentation. I hope you guys were at least interested a little bit while I was going over this, and hopefully you're at least a little bit more conscious when viewing films or your next favorite movie. Thank you.
So, Christina, some thoughts?
My thoughts. I think his topic was great. It was interesting, something we haven't really heard about, so I learned a lot. There's great information about the difference of the film and the digital camera. So, and the slides definitely did show us visually the pictures, the difference. I believe one's better than the other for different focuses. I believe his body throughout his speech was presented structurally and well. I think the only thing that I thought was a little bit distracting was the slides, how he was kept pressing to keep coming about the wording. That was a little distracting for me. Overall, I liked how he concluded in his last slide, how he asked us if we knew which one was which in the end after the information, and it kept us, I believe, involved in it throughout the whole speech.
Okay. I think you picked out a couple of things that I was going to notice about the visuals also, so let's start there. I think everything that's got an image on it works well, and everything that's got script on it is problematic. So some of it probably could be fixed. Like you have this comparison on the speed of the film, and you also have a comparison on the cost of the cameras. Those would be things I think you could put into a table chart, cut out 90% of the scripted stuff that's on the screen and give us a simple reference to that and shorten up the content there, which, by the way, you need to do because the speech does go a little over time, as you probably are aware. So, like, and another example, you've got a title page. You don't need the title page. Let's get rid of that. Just start with your attention device and the kind of rhetorical question that you have and explain what your subject is. I think, like I said, that when you were talking about the grain and noise, that was an excellent visual comparison for us to see what you're talking about. At the end, when you have kind of surveyed the audience, can you tell which is which? That's another one of those things that works really well. There are a lot of things that have images in there that help us understand the subject that you're talking about, but because there's a lot of other stuff that you also have, it gets a little confusing. And although it sounded like it was well organized at the beginning of the speech, I think you have a tendency to kind of get caught up in the minutia and forget what the big points were during the presentation. And you want to keep the audience aware of those things. There's nothing wrong with having the minor information in the speech, but you got to remember why it's there and how it fits into the material. And it sometimes felt like we're just going from one minor thing to another minor thing to another minor thing, and there actually is a reason that they are in distinct categories. You need to kind of clarify that a little bit, and you try and let the slides do the transitions for you instead of you're doing the transitions. I think the delivery is really solid for the most part. You talk to the audience 90% of the time. When you don't talk to the audience, it's not because you're looking at your script, it's because you turn and start reading and looking at things on the screen. And sometimes that happens. You need to turn and make an indication, like when you were looking at the grain on the 6 slides, you kind of have to turn so you can indicate to us what it is that we're supposed to be looking for. But there are a few times when you just kind of, maybe an extra 20 or 30 seconds, you talk to the screen instead of to the audience. And so that's a little distracting, but that's, like I said, that wasn't a big deal. Just something to be watching for in the future if you're doing other visual materials. The ISO thing, I think you need to explain a little bit more about it up front. I think as you got into the comparison using the visuals, it got clearer what it was. I'm still not exactly sure what ISO stands for, but I do know what the numbers mean and how they work in comparing the images or the circumstances under which you are filming in those particular cases. Gesundheit. If we were doing a comparison on cost, for instance, you talked about how expensive it would be for film, and I could certainly see that. But then you talked about the digital cameras and the lenses that would have to go on the digital cameras. I'm going, well, suddenly film doesn't sound so bad. But of course, there's a cost to those cameras too. So you don't really talk about the camera cost when you were talking about filming. You only talk about the film cost, and then when you talk about the digital, you just talk about, because I guess the storage cost issue is not a big deal, but it's the camera that's the big deal that takes up all those kinds of things. So And I think you can maybe do a couple of contrasting things. For example, if you are a filmmaker who makes primarily short films, what kind of investment is worthwhile to you, that sort of thing, versus if you are James Cameron or Steven Spielberg or somebody else who's making a major production, what are they looking at in terms of cost comparisons? I think that might give it a little bit more context about how much we're talking about spending. But you usually, I like the fact that you contacted groups to find information. You gave us that citation. That worked really well. All right. Thank you.